One very warm welcome to you. I can see the room is filling up. Thank you very much for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us. We are joining from Nairobi. It's a rainy Nairobi today, but this afternoon it's not raining. It's not hot, it's not cold, so the weather is perfect. Thank you very much for joining us. A very, very warm welcome to you all. My name is Doreen Odongo. I work with AWARD, African Women in Agricultural Research and Development. I wonder how many of us have an affiliation with AWARD, either as an AWARD fellow, as a mentor, as a fellow mentee, or if you've just participated in any of our trainings, feel very welcome. If you have not interacted or engaged with AWARD in the past, here is your opportunity to tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. Feel welcome. I'm honored to be the moderator this afternoon for this masterclass, and we thank you for expressing your interest and for participating. There's a question that has popped up. We invite you to kindly engage us, kindly indulge us. Do tell us where you're joining us from. Want to know how many countries are represented. Feel free to tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. As I said, my name is Doreen Odongo and I work with Kenya. Sorry, Nancy, I'm looking at your response. I work with AWARD. If you could kindly feel free to type your answer by responding to the poll that is currently displayed on your screen. I hope everybody can see it. Otherwise, we are still happy to take your responses on the chat. So I work with AWARD and I'm going to be moderating this conversation this afternoon. Today we are going to be listening in to this masterclass that is being delivered on gender, from gender responsive to gender transformative research. Our speaker today is Dr. Millicent Liani. Our speaker today is Dr. Millicent Liani. Dr. Millicent Liani is a gender and social inclusion research specialist working with the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, commonly known as IITA. She is based out of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. We are delighted and very honored to have Dr. Liani being the one to speak to us this afternoon on how to move from gender responsive to gender transformative research. And she's going to share with us her practical experience on how to actually move from one to the other, what you need to pay attention to. What do we mean when you talk about gender transformative research or gender responsive research? What does that mean? I also wanted to give an overview of the context of this webinar today. At AWARD, we are mostly known for fellowships, and we design and deliver career development fellowships, mainly targeting women, sometimes targeting both men and women, depending on the objective. You can go to our website, www.awardfellowships.org, and you can familiarize yourself with our model, especially around the fellowships. This particular masterclass is being delivered in the context of our leadership program for emerging women in science. What we are doing in that program is we are enhancing the capacity of young women who are trying to establish their careers in agricultural research, to equip them with leadership skills, but also with networks, with opportunities on how they can sustain their interest in the science careers, particularly in agriculture. And because at AWARD, one of our core focus areas is on integrating gender into our policies and practices, we cannot fail to deliver modules on how to integrate gender in agriculture. So we have in the room today not just the participants of the leadership program for women in agriculture, but we know that we have mentors. I'm delighted to see some familiar names here. We also have some partners of AWARD. Delighted to see some of our trainers here. We have some of our mentees. I'm really happy to see them here. Some of our partners. Feel very, very, very welcome. We have run very many fellowships, and I can see many fellowships represented here today, many fellows represented here. I can see policy fellows, I can see some climate fellows, I can see some original, award fellows from when we were established about 17 years ago. Feel very welcome. Without further ado, I hope we have had a chance to respond to the question that we were asking today, if you could tell us where you're joining us from. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speaker for the day to please take it away. I think before she comes on board, I'd like to make an announcement and say that we are recording the session. So be aware that the session is being recorded, and even your chats will be visible to the organizers. And more than that, we are also streaming it live on YouTube. So we are live on YouTube, and you can share the link with any of your colleagues or anybody in your network with whom you would like to share this with, or to invite them to participate in this webinar. The chat will continue to remain open. You can ask your questions, but once our speaker has delivered her presentation, we can also give an opportunity for you to ask your questions live. So if you'd like to have the mic, you can just raise your hand, and our colleagues in the tech side will be able to give you the floor. Otherwise, the chat function is open throughout. Dr. Liani, the floor is yours.
Doreen and the award team for the invite to deliver this lecture. So let me just start. Yeah, I'm so delighted even around the topic, because this is what most people are struggling with. I would say also institutions, sometimes even the language that we use when we're even developing our proposals, reporting and all that, So at least to get to understand what is this responsive and what do we even mean by the transformative research. So can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. You can proceed. You just need to put the slideshow. Okay.
Oh, yeah, so as been introduced, I work for IITA as a gender research specialist, and in IITA, the work that I do is more focused around the gender responsive and also transformative research within different projects and also the initiative. So I believe based on what the whole webinar is all about, the target audience, and what, in terms of the instructions, what the participants or even the learners need to come out, I hope by the end of the webinar, we should be able to distinguish between the responsive approaches and also the gender transformative approaches. And also, how do we actually do gender responsive and also the transformative research? We'll also be able to comprehend also why do we really need to move towards these gender transformative approaches, and then be able to also understand some of the potential tools. There could be frameworks, approaches that we actually use in terms of conducting effective gender transformative research within the agricultural, food security, I would say nutrition programs and even projects. So I'm told most of the fellows, I will also assume the majority of the participants are maybe also conversant about what the word gender is, because, yeah, as I say, there's this confusion. You see also where people are still using, of course, there's the gender language and also the other language. So just to really get a clear understanding about what is gender itself and how do we differentiate with that with sex, because sometimes we talk about, we're either collecting this data, it's about the males and the females, and sometimes we talk about having this across, like if we are focusing that on the women and the men. So basically gender, from what it means, and also for those who've already undergone, I'm told that those who've already done the gender one-on-one course in terms of understanding the concepts. So gender is basically all about the socially constructed roles, responsibilities that a community assigns to a female or a male, as you being born and as physically identified as either being female or male based on your biological characteristics. So it's what the society ascribes to these male and female in terms of the roles. And those roles, they are usually socially constructed. They are also specific to different contexts, to different societies. And those roles, because they are context specific, which applies to different, I would say, societies, it means some of the roles can change. It's not that they are customers that they cannot change in terms of, I would say, the sexual identity, which cannot change because you've been born, I would say, naturally like that with those physical, biological characteristics. And as you say, also in terms of the gender, some of these, the gender roles, and also the gender identities, they are more culturally unique. And as I said, it's specific to specific also context. And that means some of these things, they change across time and space. So when you are growing up, you are told, for you to act as maybe a good woman, you need to, this is how you need to behave. Maybe your space is mainly, I would say in the African context, you are told your space is kind of the home environment. And maybe it's the men, their space, they need to go outside to the public world in order maybe to fend for their family. And that comes in also in terms of the division of I would say the gender division of labor, where you find the women, the society ascribes into that their space is within the home, and that's where most of the reproductive activities happen. You have to bear children, you have to take care of those children, you have to do the roles around the home, the cooking, all those care work, caring for the children, caring for the elderly, caring for the sick. And when the society expects a man has to wake up and get out of the house to go out and fend, in terms of being out within the productive spheres of space, in terms of bringing in the economic benefits to the household. But I know these are changing. As we say, gender is changing. Women are at the workplace. These are the things that happened those years, I would say in the 20th century, but now in the 21st century, things are changing. Women are in the workplace. Some of us, as we see, we are even joining here, we are in the workplace. And it's all about trying to, I would say, juggle between those roles that the society has ascribed to us and also going to the public sphere of life in order to also contribute towards the productive economy. So in line to that, just also in terms of understanding the concept, there's the term about the gender needs. And yeah, in terms of the gender needs, I wanted to also get to hear what maybe people understand in terms of what are the gender needs. So if you could just type that in the chat, so that, yeah, like which type of gender needs do we have, and yeah, how do they look like? Just want to get to understand that before we proceed. Sharon, maybe can you? I just want to check through the chat. Yes, someone said practical and strategic gender needs. I'm hoping, Elizabeth, you might have been a fellow, a previous fellow, a mentor, or yes, you are right. We have two different types of gender roles. So we have the practical gender needs and also the strategic gender needs. So the practical gender needs, as I said, you find sometime in terms of the needs that you really need to like kind of respond to, so that your everyday life has to move. So that if you don't have food, it means maybe you will not survive. You also need to have like healthcare. You also need to, education is I would say basic education is something is a primary need. So the practical gender needs are actually the immediate needs that needs to be fulfilled, so that you, in terms of you sustaining your life and the living conditions, life has to move on. But now we have what we call the strategic gender needs. The strategic gender needs are strategic in that those needs are there, but those those needs are there, and for those needs to be there, it means like maybe there's a group that is dependent into another, the other group. I would say, for instance, the women mainly becoming more dependent into the men. Maybe you want to depend, when we know in our rural context, mostly in our rural context where we do agricultural research, you find women mainly kind of also depending on the men, like I need to request permission to have this particular parcel of land, maybe to do, if it's seed production, you need also to, have to ask for permission. Like you want to go maybe to take that into the market, you also have to look for permission in terms of even now spending the income that you accrue, even from that particular activities that you've been engaged in. So you find they're strategic in that it's the needs that have been there, they're dependent, and also they're the needs that really positions one group in the society to have low positions, and in most cases it's the women, and those needs is what really calls for challenging the unequal power relations between the women and the men. And for practical gender needs, these are the needs, as I said. If you ask women, like, what are your immediate needs? Someone will tell you, oh, I need my children to go to school. The kids are not going to school because they've been just out because they have no school fees. They need to eat. Someone will say, I haven't had a meal the entire day. Yeah, someone will talk about the issue about shelter. Some of them will talk about, I need improved, improved seed, or maybe I need fertilizer. So it's just those visible, unique needs. And when you ask these men and women to really mention some of those practical needs, they can easily mention that because it's something that they need so that their everyday life continues. And you find that some of those needs, in terms of when we undertake research, and then most of the work, when you talk more about, we are integrating maybe the gender responsive approaches, we find in most instances, we just say, oh, in this particular project, we want to ensure that we have more women in terms of their women participation, or maybe we want to ensure also they are even having access to a particular resource or innovation that you want to scale or even give out to them. So you find some of those needs, they're usually the practical, they're usually short term. But for strategic, it's those needs that are invisible. Sometimes even the women, you ask them whether they have other needs, they will unlikely not to talk about, maybe if they're experiencing, I would say, silence, like gender-based violence. And sometimes, even if they do not have access and even rights towards ownership of even land and even the use of even some of those resource rights. And sometimes you find there's that challenges around the limited mobility. Maybe culturally, women are more supposed, maybe there are radius of movement. You cannot just go far away. You need to ask the permission from, maybe your husband to enable you either to move, even if you want to maybe take produce to a lucrative market. That will means you have to take 2 to 3 days out for you to sell the produce. So you find it's those limiting things in terms of ways you don't have even the ability to voice up your needs, and you also have that restricted mobility for you to actually tap into what you think will actually help and sustain you. So most of those needs you find for the women, they are likely to mention them because they feel as long as the basic needs have been fulfilled, that's okay for them. They don't really look into why are they subordinated within the society, and also how can they challenge some of those gender power relations. And of course, most of those issues in terms of the gender power relations, we'll move into another aspect around how we look at the dimensions that are causing these structural inequalities in terms of patriarchy and issues about the class that is into the community that really perpetuates this. So in terms of the responsive and the transformative approaches, I would say most organizations, most organizations tend to use the Interagency Gender Working Group, the Gender Integration Continuum. And this framework, it actually helps in terms of identifying how a project or even a program, whether it's responding to some of the gender issues or not responding into that. So it looks at it in whether a program is actually gender blind, and that gender blind is you don't have the gender lens onto you, so that you're ignoring some of those sets of economic, political, the roles, and even entitlement, responsibilities, the things to do even with access, control over resources, the power relations, is something that you don't even pay to within a project or even a program. And it doesn't even collect information around, I would say these men and women and even at the minimum. And that means it's an exploitative either program or initiative because it's reinforcing those inequalities. And on the other side, you can be gender aware, but if you are gender aware, you might be gender aware, but that's where you come in. You are either just aware in terms of you are examining and the challenges towards the gender inequalities, which means if you just examine those challenges, it's kind of, trying to diagnose those symptoms. And just say, maybe it's, we have inequalities between men and women, and these inequalities are maybe because of this and this. And then you say, based on this, we are going to enhance women's participation maybe into the trainings. We will just recruit more women into these programs so that they attend trainings. And then in some instances, you even say, oh, we are coming up with like those credit schemes, financial services that maybe are more targeted, I would say, to women. But then in that point, yes, you are supporting in terms of fulfilling those, I would say, the practical gender needs in terms of the short-term outcome. But then beyond being just responsive or even accommodative, you also need to move beyond to do transformative work in terms of really challenging, those existing causes of inequality, underlying causes of inequalities. You have to really critically examine some of the norms. We know in some terms it's also some of the norms, the social norms that really guide and underlines all what happens in terms of shaping those power relations. And it's also looking at what are those systems of inequalities. Is it within the household? Is it with the community? Is it the gatekeepers in the community, the people who hold some of those old norms, are old, I would say, the traditional leaders? We have our grandmothers, grandfathers, who say it's wrong for you to really do that because those days back, women or men were not supposed to do that. So it's really trying to challenge that. And of course, the end goal is towards better development outcome. And what I like about this gender working group, gender integration container, the way it uses the traffic light approach to show how if you are blind in your project, it gives it a red color in that it's very dangerous because you're engaging into exploitative work. And then the responsive accommodative, yes, you are trying to diagnose, identify that. You are also trying to achieve the short-term outcome. But you are just moving. You are just with the amber level at the traffic light, just getting ready to move. But then you have to move beyond that to start transforming some of these social and power relations that are creating inequalities so that we get to have those long-term sustainable development outcomes. So beyond I would say the gender integration container, of course, the framework has been in existence from 2008, but now moving forward as gender researchers do their work, engage with projects, and things are working, and they need to actually shift dimensions in terms of now, how do we even undertake the transformative aspects within programs? How do we even measure, and even how do we devise indicators towards the measuring the transformative change? So beyond this, the gender integration continuum, we now have a new framework, what we call the Rich, Benefit, Empower, Transform Gender Framework. It's been in existence since 2018. And this challenges the initial framework, what I talked about, the traffic light, the gender integration continuum, in that in as much as the continuum is good, in terms of really helping us to identify how you are gender blind and also really being gender aware in terms of your responsive and transformative approaches, it does not really offer so much insights into how do you really set your objectives around what the change you really need to see. And also, besides the setting out the objective, which strategies do you devise in terms of really you meeting those objectives, and then how do you measure those outcomes? So based on that, a team of researchers, Johnson and colleagues, developed the Rich, Benefit, Empower. But then it was adapted by another team of scholars, the Claib and colleagues, who added the transform component. And this has been advanced by Ellen Chanji, who, in terms of the graphic, to really show how you can use the Rich, how you can reach different groups of, I would say, beneficiaries, if it's the men, women, and who are identified by the other social identities. How you can also do that in terms of identifying what they need to benefit from. How do you identify aspects to do with empowerment and also the transformation? So this model, as I said, the framework, it looks at just helping you to identify the objective. The objective is to actually make sure you're including like the men and women into like an aquaculture value chain. you're able to look besides just reaching the numbers, how are they benefiting into that? And those benefits, it helps you to really identify even the objective in terms of the benefits. Maybe the benefits could be for them to have equitable access to opportunities and also maybe resources. And then it looks at it beyond just the benefit. Are those people who participate into that, how do they get empowered? So it brings in the elements around the empowerment, and also now the last bit around now the transformation. How do you challenge the existing social inequalities? And then which process and also strategies do you actually use for you to do that? And the beauty with this rich, benefit, empower, transform gender framework, as I said, the indicators, it helps you identify how to really come up with the indicators, and both the quantitative and qualitative indicators. And I would say more for the rich and the benefit. I know most of us, we are used even into the programs, and even sometimes in terms of the donor reporting, we just report like the numbers, the proportions. We reach this proportion of women and youth. We reach this maybe percentage. We use maybe a quota system to reach into those, and then we end there, and then we say, yes, this program, project, whatever it was able to achieve the gender, I would say, objectives into that. So just a practical, I would say, like an example on how we've been able to use this, I would say, within an IITA project. My colleagues have been able to use this within a cassava project. It's a cassava seed system project that had taken, I would say, a gender blind approach, not really paying attention into the gender dimensions. It's just scaling cassava seeds within, I would say, the Tanzanian context, recruiting farmers, cassava farmers who are willing to become, I would say, cassava seed entrepreneurs, so that they multiply the improved cassava seeds. And then those seeds, they easily reach out to the farmers so that the farmers can now have easy access into that. But now, within the first year of the project, and that time was before the gender team came in, 24% of the, I would say, the participant into that particular project were women. So of course, they're asking myself, how comes we have, the lower number of women compared to men? And we know even cassava is mainly dubbed as a women's crop. So the team did a research around this to identify what were the underlying, what were the challenges that were creating those inequalities. And they were able to develop recommendations to actually advise the project in terms of how they can actually be able to, even in terms of their setting the objectives, their strategies, and also indicators, how they're able to reach, benefit, empower, and transform. So you can look at this through I would not go deeper into the whole. There's much more detailed information around that, which you can go through that later on. Just going through the cycle that was used in terms of now recruiting. You first have to conduct the village meetings at the community to sensitize them. They have to develop those improved varieties with the people who are into the seed system. They have to multiply that. They have to recruit them. They have to make sure they meet the National Tanzania Seed Certification Institute, the requirements for them to register as CSC, where you need to have land, you need to have capital, you need to have, even for the land, you need to have, I think, a minimum of 2 acres for you to be eligible, for you to participate into that. So once you meet those eligibility criteria, that's when they now select you. And then you are registered, taken into the training, you start preparing your land, and then they give you connection into where you get those improved seeds so that you now multiply that and sell it to a neighboring farmer. So yeah, it's through this really undertaking, using the rich, benefit, empower, transform, that you're able to identify, provide recommendations around how this particular project could do well in terms of the reaching women, youth, and youth, and also the other marginalized groups, the benefits that could be accrued through that and how that could be done, how aspects of empowerment should be done, and also how to transform those power relations, especially to land, which is a fundamental resource for seed production. So basically, just in a nutshell, between the distinction between the responsive and the transformative approaches. Most of these responsive, as we say, that the short term is just like diagnosing those, the symptoms of inequalities, but you don't really go beyond that to actually challenge and address the root causes of inequality. So it's the transformative approaches that helps you Once you diagnose and identify the gaps through the responsive approaches, the transformative is where the approaches that now help you to treat, like even uproot those, I would say, the underlying causes of those inequalities. And in most responsive work, and I'm sure most of us are conversant with that, we, in project, we talk about, we're using, the gender disaggregated data. We'll collect gender disaggregated data. We will include women. Maybe we'll have this particular quota for women. Maybe it's 50 per 50, or maybe 60%. And then this particular quota will be maybe young women, young men. What we tend to do in most of the, I would say, the engagements we are in, and some of them, I know sometimes it's usually in relation to what the donor wants to see. Maybe it's a project is short term, and that's why people will run to really do use the responsive approaches. And as we say, most of this, the disaggregation, what we do in terms of even the reporting, in most things that we talk about the trainings in terms of how many were reached, in terms of even the credits, extension services, just looking at even the numbers. It's more about capturing the numbers. But now the transformative is going beyond the numbers to really identify what is the real, the core problem, what is the root causes of that particular problem that is causing these inequalities, and then how do we address, what are the opportunities towards changing that? And you are doing that, of course, with those who are involved into that, if it's in the community, if it's the farmers, if you are value chain actors, they are being involved into that whole particular process. And in that whole process is not about the individual actors into themselves. You are also engaging those gatekeepers of power within the communities. And as I said at the beginning, the outcome, if you use these responsive, they're usually just those short term in terms of just meeting those practical gender needs, which you need to have that. They need to have this seed to plant and maybe just to enhance household food security. That is it. But you are not looking at even those inequalities, whether there are things about, I would say, gender-based violence that's happening silently. And we know issues about economic violence, where in our African system, you find the majority of the women and girls are the ones who are offering, I would say, the labor on the farm, 70%. But now when it comes to a point where it's all about the marketing and income coming to the household, in whose hands does the income goes to, and then what happens when it comes to decision making around that particular income? So we know what happens into that. I don't want to go deeper into that. Maybe we'll have conversations into that. So based on just that background, the question is, so why do we really need to embrace, I would say, these gender transformative approaches within the agricultural research? I'll say agricultural, food and nutrition security. So basically, if you look at the gender transformative approaches, I know, even as Doreen mentioned at the beginning, we like, doing these things in terms of, diagnosing, just doing the ads-on things. And within the agricultural research space, I would say it's something that has been in, I think it's for the past, I would say like 20 years. It started like in the early 2000s. And most of these within the agricultural research, it's borrowing mainly from what is happening within the global health space. The emergence of the HIV, the tuberculosis, those particular, I would say, diseases called, like for people within the global health space to really rethink about how do they intervene, and especially in the HIV that started in the 80s, 84. So really looking about, because it was a behavioral change disease, how do you change that? So most of these, I would say, the emergence of gender transformative approaches within the agricultural spaces, they are borrowing much more from what has been happening within the global health community. And it said that Carsten and Chaudhry said that since the 1994 International Conference of Population and Development, that's when the global health community, of course, increasingly recognized that gender was not just a standalone thing within the global health, but it was really a social determinant of health. And really, as I talk about issues to do with the HIV, the TB pandemic at that time, when they were really prevalent. And that recognition really resulted into the shift, I would say, within the global health community to start looking at approaches that can actually seek to examine and change the harmful gender norms and also the power imbalances. And that's what led into this, the gender transformative global health programming. And as I said, within the agricultural space, the gender transformative has evolved from the health and is now what has been used in terms of now coming up with the systemic tools, still borrowing from the health research that now helps to dismantle the root causes of inequalities within the agricultural, I would say, space, and these inequalities between the women and the men. And then how do you challenge those unequal power relations, the things to do with access, ownership of resources, there's the decision making, and also the things about, I would say, the unequal distribution of labor and the social norms. So based on these, if you look at the transformative approaches, as given the background around most of these transformative approaches, they are transformative in the end, in that when you engage with those approaches, they really provide that deep, long-lasting change. And engaging with that, not just, you don't just say, maybe I'm just going to do, you first have to actually examine and also question what are those fundamental causes of those inequalities? How can that be addressed? As what are the opportunities? And then to addressing some of those harmful structural and the normative root causes of inequalities. And as I said, most of them, they are rooted within the, I would say within the Africa space is the patriarchal, I would say, system of the power relations. We have the social norms that we need to ascribe to. For you to be a good person, you need to ascribe to this and this. And then some of these, it also goes even within the institutions, the institutional practices that we do, and how that either promotes or demotes gender equality and also attaining the social justice. And of course, using such approaches, it's all about long-term development outcomes. And the gender transformative approaches themselves, again, it's not just having the transformation. It's not just about you as an individual, say woman or a man, just looking at you as an individual identity at that. We look at it also as from the definition of gender. Gender is all about the social relations. It's all about, how the community society has ascribed to you. These are the roles that you need to do, and this is how you have to behave. This is how you have to be for you to be normal. So it's all about gender from the definition being a social relations, and which is embedded into some of those, the power structures. We also need to use the intersectionality lens, the concept of intersectionality, to really identify how multiple individual social identities, in that if you are a woman or a man, you are not just a woman or a man, we identified also on the basis of the age. We have the younger women, younger men, the older men, the older women. Their lived experiences speak different around even how they experience some of these either privileges or say maybe disadvantages when it comes even for them in terms of engagement into these agricultural research development programs. So we have to look at how those reinforce inequalities, the concept of intersectionality, how they connect together, overlap, and then through those overlapping and all that, how that constitutes towards having multifaceted, compounded forms of inequalities. And just going through, I would say, the whole concept of intersectionality, there's this Simpson 2009 provided a really great, I would say, simplified diagram that really helps someone to really understand what do we mean by using the intersectionality lens. So in the middle white bit, it shows this is a person's unique, I would say, identity. This is your aspect of identity. If you are maybe, you identify yourself, you are a man or a woman. But being a man or a woman, as I said, it's not that you are just customed, and in terms of you just being a man or a woman, our identities are shaped by different aspects. And this could be aspects, as I talk about age, social status, aspects around disability, the family status, our geographical location, the income levels, religion. And all these aspects of identities, they are shaped. I will talk about I mentioned about these systems and processes of oppression. Issues about the patriarchy, discrimination, ableism, maybe those who are disabled versus those who are unable, the issues of ageism, and how those really come together in terms of shaping someone's unique own experiences. And using this, I would say the intersectional lens within the gender transformative research work, it just not all about just collecting, I would say, information or data around and understanding who are these people, but it's really looking about beyond those intersecting categories. You have really to do a multi-level analysis to really understand what is it that is shaping those identities, I would say, at an individual level, the micro level, at the household, at the community, and also, you talk about even in terms of, I would say, the policy level, the national level policies. Are they like even enabling or disenabling of this? And you also need to interrogate intersectionality calls for interrogating aspects around power. And this is where you need to do issues about the power analysis. And for the power analysis, you're looking at it, the 4 dimensions of power, in that, do you have the power within yourself? You're like someone, you have your own individual ability to make informed decisions and act upon them, or is it someone that's making decisions for you? It also looks about analysis of aspects to do with the power to the people. The power to, that means the power to do or even engage into some of those, I would say, initiatives or even collaborative activities. And that could be in terms of your capabilities. Do you have the skills? Do you have the required knowledge that gives you that particular power for you to engage into that? It looks at the aspects around the power with, which is about the collective agency, engaging into aspects around collective action, the membership into the groups, and how that helps you to wield the power around that. And also the power over it. Do you even have that power over some of those, I would say, the structures and systems that are creating inequalities within the context where you are, whether it's the household, community, or even whether it's within, I would say, the state level in terms of the national macro level policy environment. And this lens, it also helps you to reflect yourself as a researcher. It's not you just maybe researching and doing this. Sometimes if you're researching this, I would say yourself in terms of also your identity, maybe you are someone who is learned, your educational status, maybe keeps you, I would say, further apart from maybe the people who are researching at the community. Maybe you got the community where most people are mainly achieved, I would say, the basic education. So it's really reflecting around, putting the aspects around the reflexivity and positionality, positioning yourself as a researcher. Do you just get in, immersing in terms of using an ethic approach where you immerse into the community and then come and interpret what you get from that based on your own understanding? Or do you go in, you become also an insider? An insider, in most instances, it really means about relating with the community, and sometimes it's also called about living with the community, for you to understand what they go through, the everyday life experiences, and then you come out, and through that, you are able to co-create, even in terms of analysis, you're able to do the co-analysis with them, so that whatever knowledge you get from those, it actually represents what actually is, I would say, the real needs, the real realities, and also the real aspirations of the people you are researching. It's not about understanding these issues across time and space, and it's all about promoting social justice and equity. And despite that, some of these gender transformative approaches, they mainly rely on the use of participatory action research methodologies. And most of these participatory action research methodologies, they involve actually you as a researcher collaborating with the participants, really to understand what is that particular social issue. And then you can now take action together in terms of what is it that is needed in order for you to bring about social change. And most of those participatory action research methodologies, they rely with the drawing because they happen in the community and with the community and with the people in the community by themselves. It's them who, you as a researcher, you don't go there. I know the way we are used to go with your questionnaire or your tool. You just guide them, but it's you stepping aside and letting the community tell you about their stories, their challenges, the root causes of inequalities, and how they feel should be addressed. So it's through that you are a researcher, you take that, yes, you are there, but not really taking a leading role the way we do in the questionnaires, asking questions, and then we leave, we analyze, and then we say, it's really working together with them. You're just guiding them, but it's you learning from them about what is it that they really feel. It's the real problems that they're experiencing, what they feel is those, the underlying causes and opportunities that they already know are there that exist. And sometimes you'll find even their programs, maybe that are working in the community, they will tell you there's already this particular program or group that is doing this in the community. So tap onto this so that you can run now your transformative, I would say, intervention so that it can bring about the change that the community or whoever you are researching really wants to see. And being tools that rely on the drawings, as I said, most of them, there are quite a number of them. But from my end, what I really like, the tool that I will always say it's always close to my heart, is actually the problem tree analysis, where you go to the community, you tell them, you introduce about it's a project, you want to understand what are the challenges, maybe towards limited engagement of maybe the women and also the youth, or also even the person with disability and even other marginalized group. You want to know maybe this program is here, this project is here, who is missing out of this project? Why are these people missing? Why are these people, if they are missing, how can we bring these people into the program? And then what is it, the fundamental cause that is making these people to miss out of this? And then what opportunities are there for us? So it's just using, I would say, the trunk to really denote what are the core problems. And then when they are drawing the roots, you just inform them those are the root causes. They're able to highlight the root causes. These are the real root causes. And this is the root that really goes deep. They're even able to draw and show you which root goes deeper. And based on that, in the analysis, together you can even ask, how do we, uproot that root deep that you say it's actually the fundamental cause of what's happening. So there are quite a number of tools. The problem tree analysis, as I said, can be used together with the cause effect flow diagrams. We use the pairwise participatory mapping tools, the Venn diagrams to understand which social institutions, groups are already acting in the community, and also the level of the relationship with the people you are researching alongside those particular existing groups or organizations within the community. So besides that, for the gender transformative approaches, as you go through that whole process of really understanding the causes of inequalities and how to address, is through those, using those particular, I would say, participatory action research that helps the participants to encourage the bit around the social learning. And as they engage through that particular process, they go through a process of critical, self-critique. They reflect about that particular issue, and it brings them really that up to the point of having a self-awareness about that particular problem, and they're able to devise actions around how to bring about that change. And that whole process, it's all not just happening once. I know in most of our research, we just do the cross-sectional studies. You go to collect the data and all that, you come, you end, and then, so it's really engaging with the community. With whichever groups you are researching, it has to be something that is continual, iterative, and I would say to a minimum, I would say 6 months, because you have to engage that through the critical reflections, the actions. Are there any changes? What changed? Why did this one did not change? Just to really understand what. So it's really being with those people, as we talked about issues of reflexivity, being with them, reflecting around the whole process, immersing yourself into that, and then coming out. Now, you as an outsider to bring to define how the whole process and charting the change that the research have actually devised. And the change does not just happen through, I would say, one level. I talked about the change in yourself as an individual. You're able to make your own informed decisions. It also happens at the meso level, more from the household, the community, what happens even at the market level, and also the macro environment level. I would say the state level in terms of also the policies and also the strategies that are also there to support that particular change. So in terms of the domains of the change, in terms of now engaging in the gender transformative research approaches, as I talked about the change, the individual change is more about the individual agency. This is where, as I said, it's through that whole process, you undergo, the participants undergo the process of self-awareness. They also the self-critique about the challenge and also devising the actions around how they need to get out of that and also address the root causes of those inequalities. So the bit around that change at the individual level, as you say, the individual is more about you as an individual, so it's more at the personal level and really looking at it in terms of what knowledge, skills. I talked about the capabilities. Do you even now have the power to even engage into that? Do you even have a confidence now? Now you have the power into, you have even to confidence to really speak about these things, like even in the public without, sometimes without even feeling ashamed or something. And beyond that, looking at the second dimensions in terms of course, the domain of change in terms of addressing the power relations. And these power relations still, as I talk about the dimensions of the power, having the power over, I would say, the people, and that is more over those structural and controls of inequalities, having the power within yourself, to the people, and also with the people in terms of the collective action. And the things about the power relations mainly happens from, I would say at the meso level in terms of the household, what happens in terms of the decision making. Are they joint decision making? Is it there someone who's just making like sole decisions? Is there someone who's consulted into all some of those decisions? And also, how does the negotiations happen? And studies have also shown that 70% of most of the agricultural research and development projects, they tend to collect data, but they ignore questioning issues about, these power relations. And the last domain about the social institutions is more about the structural level change. And for these social institutions, I like the work by Naila Kabir, 1999, talking about, how do you work around these social institutions and how do you also define these social institutions? So the social institutions are defined, as either being formal and also informal. So the informal is where we have those institutions where there is unwritten rules or laws and even procedures about how things need to be done. And this happens, I would say, more at the family, at the household level, and also at the community level. Some things happen, and this is where the things about the norms, the behaviors, and also, some of these customs and all that. So it's fine that some of those are there, but they are informal. They are not written. Some of them, they are not written. And then moving into these other form of the institution, you also find, I would say, the institutions that are really more formal, where you have really formal policies, like our workplace. If you go to an organization, if you're working like people who maybe working like the market actors and all that, they will tell us maybe you have these structural and standard operating procedures on how to do. So there you find it's written. So it's all about looking at it in terms of the change you want to do. Is it more at the informal structural level, or is it also moving on to the formal level? And this, as I said, is mainly moves from the family, what goes into the community, the market, and also the state, in terms of now influencing where your spheres of influence should be and where you should interrogate the change. So FAO, IFA, Dual Food Program, and the CG Gender Researchers in 2023, they came up with this beautiful framework that really helps, put together, like, what are those key dimensions of gender transformative? I would say if you're undertaking gender transformative research, that is going to also lead into gender transformative change. What are the key dimensions that it's a must you have to look into? And I think we've gone through all these in terms of the formal social institutions, the informal social institutions, the issues to do addressing power relations, and also agency ability to make your own informed decisions and act upon it. And the framework also highlights all those spheres of influence I was talking about. The spheres of influence has to be you yourself as an individual, whoever that particular individual participant. It has to also move into the meso level of the household. And that looks at what goes within the, I would say, like intra-household relationship, decision-making, negotiations that happens maybe in terms of roles, responsibilities, access to resources, access to opportunities. Yeah. And then what also happens within the community? Your community is also your sphere of influence. Are you engaging like these, the gatekeepers of power, the leaders, and those groups that are there within the community? Are you using that as a sphere of influence to enable you act upon these 4 different dimensions of change? And then it also look about the organizations also as a meso level, and this could be our actors that we work with, the public-private partnerships. We work with research, development, private sector, and other organizations that are part into that. Just interrogating that, and also now the last level, which is the macro policy environment, looking at how does that look at it? Is it enabling? Is it disenabling? What does the donor community environment look like in terms of, supporting this whole process of change? So, in terms of the framework itself, just as we look at it, it has different dimensions in terms of the particular focus of the change that you want to see. Maybe for individual, you want to see changes in attitudes and beliefs. You want to really see them like even having access to services. And then you want them to really have this conscious confidence. They build have self-esteem, they're able to speak for themselves, they have to come up with informed decisions about what they want. And then moving on to the community, it's all about, what we do, like maybe it's engaging them into the projects. What is it that you need to do at the formal institutions, like a good practice? Are you going to register one person? We know in our farming communities, if you go and ask in a community or a household who is a farmer, you are likely to be given the name of the household head, majority of who are men. You are told this is the farmer that we have. So if you are going in an initiative that is going maybe to use the people who are registered as farmers, to use that in terms of either recruiting or using that as your sample, you find that sample is blind. So it just also gives you good practice, like how you need to do, even if it's joint decision making. Are you going to register the spouse? Are you going to involve them into that whole particular process? So it's more about the spousal engagement, how you deal with issues of inter-household decision making, and also issues to do, I would say, an equal distribution of labor within, I would say, the household. So I'll not go through all that because of time. I just want to move to some of the examples of the GTAs that we have been using within the agricultural research space. And just as I said, the gender transformative approaches within the agriculture, as I said, it's something as we borrowed from the global health research community coming into the agricultural space. What is there mostly, it really comes in agricultural, but it comes more from the development sector. So you'll see like the work that people who work with IFAD, World Food Program, we have FAO, and also we have Oxfam, who've really been able to do much around, I would say, some of transforming some of these gender relations with their work. I would say the grounding work in the coffee projects in Uganda. So FAO, IFAD, and WFP in 2020, they came up with what they call a compendium of 15 good practice for gender transformative approaches. It has 15 great examples that really outlines what, it actually even gives an introduction around what are gender transformative approaches, how do you undertake gender transformer? How do you decide in terms of including which gender transformative approach into whatever project, whether it's about agriculture, food or nutrition security? So the compendium has the 15 good practices around that. I not outline them, but the GTS, it also provides examples around where those particular gender transformative approaches are actually intervening. Is it at the macro, as I talk about the macro individual level, or is it a GTA that intervenes at both at a macro individual level, at the meso, I would say family, community, state and market, family, community and market level? And then is it something that also intervenes at the macro policy level? So there are great examples provided, like in terms of issues to do with engaging men, in terms of the journeys, in terms of addressing issues to do with the harmful masculinities. So it has a tool that's called the Journey of Transformation that really takes to developed by the Promundo that provides practical example on how do you engage these individual men and boys, and including the women and girls around that particular subject, and how do you the process around even you championing that particular change that you want to see, and also how do you measure that particular change. And besides that, I would say in CG, we are more conversant with the Women Empowerment in Agricultural Index tool, the WEI, which has been advanced and made into more a project level WEI tool, so that any project can use that. And they also have a pro WEI for market. And given it was developed, I would say more in a crop-based context, we have entities that are working like on livestock, like have come up with what they call the WELI, Women Empowerment in Livestock Index. And those who are working like in fisheries, they've also come up with the WEFI, Women Empowerment in Fish Index. So they've been able to adapt this pro-AI to look at those particular indices, dimensions of change, and how that should actually inform in terms of their project designs, their objectives, their strategies, and how they can measure that particular change. Meso level, so many things, so many GTS intervening that helps to spur change at the household, community, market level. We have the gender action learning system. We also have the household methodologies, the gender family model, community conversations. We have the Demetria clubs by FAO. Yeah, the social action analysis with care. Also the farmer business schools, but also care. So you can see most of these are coming from the development perspective. Moving into now, like for researcher, how do you embed like even the research questions within those particular GTS? So besides that, just as I say, most of those GTS that the commonly known, having been developed more from, I would say, a developmental space within the agriculture, food and nutrition security, the team, the CG gender platform team, with the gender researchers, they came up with what a community of practice, what we call the gender transformative research methodologies, community of practice. So this was formed in 2021. And the aim is actually to advance the gender transformative ambition of the CG, its partners, and also interested organizations, and also individuals. And this COP creates a space, a safe space for exchanges around some of these gender transformative methodologies that I mentioned before. And based on this, the COP, it has convened. I was a convener of this. I stepped out mid last year. So it convenes, the COP convenes webinars, I would say, on a monthly basis. And those webinars are actually focused on 4 interrelated themes. We have those that really focus on things to do with gender equitable masculinities. Those are focused on intersectionality, the gender transformative research processes and data, and also those that really looks about issues to do with gender norms in agriculture and natural resource management in terms of advancing issues to do with individual agency and norms, and that how that enables or disables transformation within agricultural and natural resource management. And with this team within this community of practice, there are the gender researchers who came up with some of the methodologies that they felt the current most commonly used transformative approaches, they really do not have a research elements. They don't have like proper research questions into that, the research component into that. So they come together and they've been able to devise. It's a series of new, what I would say the most recent gender transformative approaches that currently have really a proper research dimension into that. You'll find the research dimensions. It talks about where does it engage, which spheres of influence is it targeting, who are your target groups. It also talks about the resources, the personnel, what skills do you need. It also has, they also provide like even the budgetary, estimations. If you want to use this particular, how much budget will you need? And also for that particular change, if you're engaging, for how long? Is it something you'll do in 6 months? Is it a 1 year or even a 2 year, more than 2 year intervention? So currently there is that I know there is ongoing tools that are coming, but we have 7 sets of tools that came just recently, end of last year. So there's one that looks at the typologies for targeting private sector investments in guessing agri-food value chains. And then, of course, the gender action learning system have been part of that. We've been able to work towards and ensuring that it really has a research elements, what we now call the GAS for GTRI. And then there's one for how do you embed gender transformative, especially for those who are doing scaling of innovation in terms of socio-technical innovation bundling. How do you embed that and what does that mean if you are scaling agricultural innovations? And then we have another one that's really focused around the gender and social norms assessment at community and organizational level, the one that focuses also around participatory integration into climate services. We have one around women's collective voice in action for decision making, the vision, voice, and validation tool, what they call the triple V tool. And then we have one that was also developed, which is really also great, that really focuses more, I would say, more at the macro policy environment, where we still do not have so much to. So Charity say has been able to develop a methodology for understanding and analyzing the gender transformation in development planning. It's called the G-STAR plan, which looks at what really goes within the national, subnational level and how do you analyze and guide the processes of transformation within those macro environments. So I know time is almost. Sharon, I don't know how I'm doing. Just the last bit is how do you actually get into that whole business of designing and implementing these gender transformative, and even selecting these gender transformative approaches. So the whole process is you don't just do it, it also engages various steps that you need to follow. First, you need to undertake a formative research in terms of understanding the social and gender analysis. I talk about social and gender analysis because here you have to talk about gender and also the intersectional dimensions. So that's why it's social gender analysis, to identify, some of those underlying causes of inequalities. And as I said earlier, what is really preferred into this is mainly participatory action research methodologies that helps you to really identify what's the core problem, the underlying causes of that particular problem, and then what are the opportunities and mechanisms that can trigger the social change. And then it's also through that, using such tools, you're able to identify what are like the entry points and also the levers that you will use in terms of spurring that particular change. And some of those tools, they also helps you to really identify who are the real existing, I would say, local collaborators you want to work with. And of course, for GTAs, when you are doing gender transformative research work, we actually advise you try to tap into existing programs or projects within the community. It helps in terms of if it's a project that's ongoing, you just tap in and add in whatever you want, because maybe something that has been in the community for long, they know that particular program, so that when you add these into that, it's easy for it to go, and also the change in terms of really advancing and also monitoring the change, it becomes easier, and also it reduces the cost. So the second step, once you do the formative research, you need now to design. And this design is actually a co-design. This is where you even go back to where you, with the people you research, you have to validate the findings and then sit down together and prioritize. You've identified so many problems, so many root causes. So which is that particular giga problem that you feel it's heavy, that if it's addressed, some of these other problems can actually start to actually even be resolved. And then you are looking at it. Besides that, what is that particular deep root that we need to address? But in some instances, you can't address all the roots. So you are looking at what is that real big giga root that you really need to uproot with the help of the research, so that it spurs the change. So it's looking at it in terms of the design, doing that co-design with the research. It's through that process, you're able also to define at which point do you want to see the change. Is it at the individual level? Is it at the meso level? Or is it at the macro policy level? And then besides that, as you design and also now coming into the implementation, that's where you have to identify what is the purpose and also the vision for the change that you really desire to address. Where is that change? Where is that going to happen? How is that going to happen? This is where the how is really looking at, based on the outcome you get from this formative research and where you agree you want to. Now you go back to, I will say, the inventory of those GTAs. You look at which methodology now better fits this particular problem. Is it issues about issues maybe to do with land rights, women's land and resource rights? Is it issues to do with access to extension services? So you look at that, and then going back to those tools, you're able to know which tool now better works for you based on where it's intervening and also the focus. Are you looking at the value chain actors? Are you looking at people at the national, subnational? Is it a policy? Charities register plan too. Once you do that, you also need to look at it and also agree, how long are you going to run this particular program? Is it something you want to do it short term, which is like within a period less than 1 year? Is it medium term, where you want it to be a 1 or 2 year? Is it something that you want to do like over 2 to 3 years, which is a long term? Do you have a budget with that? And also, do you have a personnel with the right skills to support you run that particular? So it comes at this point, and also designing and implementing. So once you do that, of course, you need to evaluate the changes. And as I said, initially, the changes has to be in relation to the Reach, Benefit, Empower framework. How are you reaching? Who is benefiting? How are you empowering? And what are you transforming? You need to, because the changes across that particular continuum of framework. And this is where you ask the question, how do you really go about designing those indicators? I will move into my next slide, just to show you how you do that in terms of creating the impact statement, how you come up with identifying the key challenge across the different intersectional groups, the dimensions of change you want to see, and also the spheres of influence. How do you come up with the outcome statements, and also the specific gender transformative indicators? And of course, once you do all this process, you've implemented, you've evaluated, it's working. It's good also to scale out. So the last step, it's all about, scaling that, sharing the learnings to inform future initiatives. You could scale out that, so that if you're doing a pilot, it could now something that could go into scale in I would say in related contexts, but really documenting well how that has been done, so that if someone takes that, it's easy to go that. And you could do that in terms of scaling. You could scaling out, so that that particular intervention could be done, so that it's reaching now more people who are benefiting from that, in terms of addressing, I would say, the fundamental root causes of inequalities. Or it could also be between doing that at an institutional level. You want to transform what goes within our institutions in terms of the policies. Institutions start to rethink about, hey, we need to start focusing on the GTS, the donors, strategic partnerships around that in order to enable the scaling up of such models. And in terms of the process for the change, just as I was talking about, I know about developing the GT indicators. That's where I know most people, including myself initially. FAO, IFAD, World Food CG Gender Researchers in 2023, they developed, I would say, the key information in the gender transformative change in agriculture, food security, and nutrition programs. So it provides, the guideline provides a 5-step process that you really need to follow when developing gender transformative change indicators. And as I said, at the first step, you need to actually create the impact statement. And the guide shows really takes you through the, I would say, the practical process that you really need to go through. So like in terms of creating an impact statement, it takes you through how do you even choose an adjective that really describes the desired change you want to see. How do you determine the core area of gender inequality that you want to really focus on? And also, it also adds in relation to that, how do you, you need to indicate who is going to benefit from that particular project or even a program. So it gives also examples of some of those impact statements, like if you are focusing on something that's going to focus around enhancing women's participation in decision making, to the marketing, you would do that through enhancing, like saying that you want to increase participation in decision making for the women, maybe farmers within that particular domain. And then besides that, it talks you through how do you identify the challenge that you want to measure. As you talk about the intersection of groups, look at it, what is that particular challenge you're addressing and who are you targeting? It gives like examples, like for this, they talk about, in this particular, you need to focus on resource poor women. And it's not just resource poor women. Are they married women? Are they unmarried? Are they widowed? Are they separate? So you have to really justify. Are they the rich women, or are they the maybe poor women financially, or maybe they do not have the land and all that? So it's resource poor married women. Maybe they lack the voice and the bargaining power, and that's what you want to address. And then the target group, it also looks at that step. Who are you targeting? Maybe for these resource poor married women, we are going to also target their spouses. So this is mainly happening within the household and the community space. And step 4, in terms of identifying the desired outcome and what change you need to see. And just to also mention that the transformative change is not a rapid change where you just want to, maybe there's a button you just want to press, where you say, out of these 4 buttons, which is it that if I press, I will start seeing the change. So it's incremental change. That's why we say being incremental, it has to be something, I would say at minimum 6 months, so that you are doing that. It is short-term intervention, medium-term, and then the long-term. So the guideline provides the step-by-step process. It also provides how you can devise the quantitative and qualitative measures around how you can devise that change. So the quantitative around the reach, the benefits, and the qualitative around the bits around the empower and the transform. So just in conclusion, just to say the gender transformative research methodology, it's not, I would not say it's not like the gender responsive, which I would say it's easy, it's straightforward. You're just doing, the gender disaggregated, the social analysis, the social disaggregation, in terms of issues to do with the access, participation, and all that. So for GTS, it's more complex. It actually demands, I would say, more time, expertise, and the complexities also comes in terms of how are you going to do it? Is it something that you want to do like maybe in a short term? And also the short term, it depends with what you are intervening. And it's complex in a way. You see, sometimes there's these requirements, I would say, from projects, programs. People are like, if you're writing a proposal, someone says, please add for me a paragraph, on gender transform. And you're like, I'm adding a paragraph on gender. What does that mean in terms of gender transformative? And maybe this is a 1-year program or even a 2-year program. By the time they start all that process, you even ask about the budget. Is there a budget to do this? Someone gives you like 20,000. If you load up the compendium and also these new tools, each of those tools has like budgetary estimations around it, where you are intervening and how much that. So if you give me like 15 or 20,000 USD and you want me to do this at minimum 6 months, so do you want me to really do transformative work, or do you just want me to do gender responsive work? So it's just through this process, just to really see how demanding it is, how complex it is. Also, in terms of also the technicalities that are involved into that whole process, because you are not just doing these things on the desk. It's not a questionnaire that I'm going to just, administer and come back. It's not an FGD that I'm going to conduct in the community in-depth interview and come. You have to engage with the people, if it's the community in whichever, and that engaging has to be iterative, continuous for you to document that particular change. And basically, what that means also, we also need to have skilled facilitators. And those people who have these skills that are required for this, they have to go through, I would say, the capacity building process for them to really understand those whole process, how to administer, and especially if you are using these participatory tools that entails like even growing, how do you even interpret the data from using such particular methodologies. And just in the end, using, of course, gender transformative research approaches is actually good in terms of course, meeting the sustainable agricultural research and development requirements towards the structural formation. And these GTS is not just about the inclusion bit. We've just included these, the women, the men, the marginalized group. It's not just about that. It's all about addressing the change. I've added some of the resources around, yes, that can be tapped into, and the links to that. I end there. Thank you. And I just want to say, doing this in 1 hour, I just felt it's too GT. I would say the gender transformative. I would say it means like, if it's a training, 3, 5, because it have to do the practical and so on. And yeah, so thank you so much. Yeah, I'll be open to questions, comments around this. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Millicent, for taking the time to take us through what this means and for really helping us appreciate the amount of work that this takes, that it's not just a tick box. I remember at the beginning you were talking to us about moving from numbers beyond the numbers. It's an excellent presentation. Thank you very, very much. I was seeing how we are running out of time, but I could not interrupt this. You're right. We really just wanted to have this to start this conversation and to see how we might sustain it. But like myself, I'm sure many of us here have learned a lot of things. You've really done a good job at breaking this down, helping us appreciate when we talk about gender responsiveness, what does this mean? And also helping us start to understand how we can make a case for more resources to be allocated. I can see a lot of people in the chat who are actually decision makers, some who are, getting there. How might we message this so that people can appreciate, especially the people who are concerned with, allocating the resources, allocating the time for them to appreciate what this requires. But most importantly, for them to appreciate what we are envisioning as the outcome. Where are we going? This is where we are going. So this is what we require. So it is 3 minutes. We have just 3 minutes of what we had reserved. And I want us to have an agreement with our audience. If you agree, we will take 10 minutes because I can see 3 hands are up. And I can see some questions in the Q&A. I know that we're going to share the presentation. I had seen people asking, and Dr. Liani has opened up to engaging with us even after this. So there's that room to continue having these conversations even offline. There's opportunities to really explore how we might continue collaborating with her or among ourselves. However, if you indulge us, we can take just 10 more minutes and to see which questions we can respond to. I can see 3 hands up. I'm not sure that if I give you the floor, you will stick to 30 seconds of your question. So what I want to do is to start, if you're in agreement, and I know you're in agreement, we will start with the Q&A. And there are some questions that are very much pretty straightforward. Some maybe require in-depth discussions. So I will read out the questions. There's a question from Harriet, Rose Harriet Okich. What practical indicators can measure whether communication efforts are reducing gender gaps in access to scientific information? So I know that in your presentation, Millicent, you have a lot of materials, references and sources and toolkits that people can refer to.
Yeah.
But I'm sure this is a question that you can easily respond to. And then there's a question from Edith that is related to a question that I had seen from, I think it was Hudson, who was talking about in moving beyond women. So Edith Ogalo is saying, when designing a gender transformative project, must it be inclusive of all women, men, youth, etc., or can it just target a particular social group, e.g., women, and still be gender transformative? The floor is yours, Millicent, to start with the indicators question and then with Edith.
So much. I think I'll start with the one about the women. I think in my initial, the distinction between the responsive, the transformative, I think I explicitly noted in terms of the engagement. In most of these responses, you find most of the engagement, it's geared towards the women and girls. But in terms of the transformative, you have to engage both the men, the women, the girls, the boys. And I talked about also the influential gatekeepers of power within those spheres of influence, whether it's in the household, our grandmothers, grandparents, whichever, in the community, the traditional leaders, all those people who have influence. Instead, in markets, you have to include that. That's why it's transformation for all. And that's why you also have that tool about the journey of transformation, where you need to engage both the men, the boys, and also the women and the girls into those particular conversations. So in GTA, you have to engage both. They have to accept there is a challenge. And I've really liked this also myself doing this, like this, I would say the formative work, engaging in the community. More, I would say also in the Muslim dominated communities, issues around polygamy, asking, like if we are in a polygamous household and we want a woman to be registered as a seed producer, which woman will you choose? Is it the first wife, the second, the third, and why will you? How do you end into that? So just really looking around, and even of those wives, which one offers more? Because there are those who have preferential treatment and those who are more involved into, I would say, doing the labor work within. So it's engaging everyone. It's critical reflection, critical awareness to actually see their problem, and then coming up with joint actions towards how that should be addressed. So the question about the practical questions around the indicators, I think I had about communication knowledge within the compendium, within this, the guideline for measuring gender transformative. We have also a section around the GTS, how do you measure across, change across, I would say, programs, projects that mainly even focus on issues to do with the ICT. We know things to do also with the digital innovations and tool. And we know in most instances, in terms of the how we get even working with the extension and advisory system in terms of how we relay the information. Some of them are app-based. And if you look at the penetration of the smartphone, we know the high majority of the men have the smartphone. If you look at the rural women, majority of them, they'll have that normal, those normal GSH phones. So it's really looking at that and relying at really untapping that and having those, deep communication, and even with those who are doing, when you come up with an intervention or a program that you say you want to enhance access, maybe to women on extension and advisory service around digital innovations, who is likely to be left out from that, and what is it that you need to devise around it? I've seen program, and that's why we have, like in some of those, we have programs like the farm radio who still use that in terms of the local communities. And then they have that messages going, especially to the women who in most instances, they tend, in the Tanzanian context, they have the village saving and credit groups, which they call Vikoba. So you find mostly on the Sundays they meet, so you target such groups with such information. You could do also, if it's the churches where you want now to target those influential, I mean the mosque, the churches, influential leaders in terms of really spurring that particular change. So in terms of the indicators, the tools, they are there. So many, I didn't go through that, but that particular guideline is so awesome. It provides those practical and step by step, which you need to rethink about whatever you are doing and just look at that. How do you come up with your impact statements, the objectives? How do you devise the change for which groups and at which spheres of influence? Back to you, Doreen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so it's what I'm hearing is that it's a little bit more nuanced. You really need to understand the context within which you're doing this work so that you don't leave out any evidence that would be important for you to track and to see if you're making progress. I want us to respond to a question by Hudson. Hudson is saying, your second question, the Malabo Declaration introduced by annual reviews to track progress in ag transformation. Yet many gender indicators still focus more on participation than on fiscal equity. And you're saying in Uganda in practice and in Africa in general, very few countries critically assess whether agricultural budgets are truly gender responsive or whether public spending meaningfully reaches rural women farmers. So your question is, should gender transformative research deliberately integrate public expenditure analysis to examine alignment between financing and gender commitments? And should public data collected depending on taxes, e.g., gender inclusion? Anyway, so just about integrating public expenditure analysis in some of what you're tracking to be gender transformative.
Yeah, so much for that. I would say really great and insightful question. And yeah, it just brings me to, I would say, when I talk about the changes that we need to do, the GTS that intervenes at the macro policy environment level. Because if you are doing something around the public data, the expenditures and financial, you are looking at it in terms of the policy environment. Do they even have, I would say, the strategies? If they have like the gender strategies, do they have, like in terms of their strategy, do they have a strategy or even a standard operating procedures that really guides that particular domain in terms of how responsive they are, which particular data are they collecting? Is it just about the participation? If it's just the women and the men, even if in terms of contribution to, I would say, the GDP, is it just looking at that, or but are they disaggregating across the different groups? Are they looking at, I would say we do that mostly with the youth because of the agenda for youth in Africa. But now going beyond looking at even the other groups, the persons who are disabled, looking at people with different, I would say, economic status, do we really do that? So I think for that, it's all about how do we tap in terms of spurring that change at the macro policy environment. And in that conversation is about who do you engage. For us in gender and agriculture, do we also engage people in the Ministry of Finance? Or do we just go there and say, this is the Ministry of Gender, is the Ministry of Agriculture? Do we also engage, the prevalent, that even people who are focusing on issues even to do with, I would say, the human rights and all that, because we have issues around the land resource rights. Do we engage? So it's all about having that at the back of your mind, looking at your sphere of influence, looking at who, that's why we talk about the formative research. Who should be here? Who is missing? Why is that particular missing? How can you bring that person to the table to have that particular discussion so that we now develop that particular solution or intervention that is able to spark change, that ensuring no one is left behind?
Yes, very, very interesting. We need to understand that it's multifaceted and the need to involve different stakeholders in this. It's not just something that only one stakeholder, it's not a burden that relies on one stakeholder. Yes, there needs to be ownership and leadership, but you need to bring other people on board. Harriet has a question here, which I want to respond to, unless Millicent will have an addition as I'm looking at time. How can we address structural constraints like land ownership or access to credit that are beyond the scope of a single research project? And I think my response to this is this is where you now start looking at policies and the kind of policy changes that you would want to see. To what extent are some of these policies addressing some of these issues, for sustainability beyond just one project? If you're looking at land, so what are the land policies? And in what ways are these policies either exacerbating the gender gaps or addressing these gender gaps? You can even do gender analysis on these policies to understand how the policies are best addressing the gaps that you want to achieve. The gaps that you want to address. And also, of course, when you're doing this, a lot of it is based from the evidence. So the research projects are very important because that's where you start seeing the evidence. And how you can scale your interventions beyond that project and to continue working with other actors such as policymakers. So I'll leave that one there so that I can give the opportunity. I think I'm going to just give the floor to one person. Catherine Juguna, can somebody give her the mic? I'm requesting my colleagues. Okay, Juguna, you're in. The floor is yours. Go ahead. Okay, we can't
And
hear
yeah,
you. I think she's dropped off. Maybe we give it back to Anane Gemeda.
Oh, hi, you can hear me?
All right, go
yes.
on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I didn't raise my hand for a question, or was that not
Okay,
the
no problem
question?
then. Thanks. Let's go to Anane Gemeda.
Okay.
Do you have a question? Okay. I think because of time, I would like to bring this to a close. However, I really, really want to appreciate all of us for our active participation, for listening, for encouraging our presenter, for asking those questions. It's been a really, really, really insightful session. Like our speaker said, 90 minutes, are not even enough to have this conversation, but really it was a conversation starter and we are really looking forward to further engagements with all of you. Do feel free to send us emails. If you have questions, we will share with you this presentation. You can directly engage Millicent on the side, but you can also come back to us. I can see a poll here. One of the things that we're asking is if you think we should do more of these sessions, please tell us. But
Yes, we should do more. And Doreen, I just want to say, like the COP, the CG Gender Transformative Research Community of Practice, as we say, it's open. CG Gender researchers, we also encourage other people who are interested to really join the COP. I think I will send that. I will liaise with the team that is leading that from the Alliance of Biodiversity and see it with you, Doreen, and then you could send that whoever wants to join the COP because it's a great interactive. And also tomorrow, I think there is Eileen who is presenting one of the gender transformative approach on the socio-technical innovation bundling and how that should be done within the agricultural work. So yeah, it's really a useful space for us to continue this conversation and do the work the right way.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Millicent, for that insight. And we shall be reaching out to Eileen to actually maybe come back and deliver a session and talk to us about that community of practice and some of the work that they're doing. So keep it here. I know that a lot of you saw this call from our social media platforms or our website. We'll be coming back to you with the follow-up sessions. Otherwise, from us here at Award and our speaker, thank you very much. That has been your session. Have a good evening or enjoy the rest of your day from wherever you're joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.